Welcome to Life Stories, where we bring you tales of courage, resilience, and the power of the human spirit. In today's story, we follow Jake and Ryan Carter, two brothers with a bond forged in the crucible of life's toughest battles. When a dangerous figure named Henry Whitaker threatens their city with greed and violence, the Carters risk everything to bring him to justice. It's a journey filled with danger, heartache, and profound lessons about love, empathy, and standing up for what's right. Subscribe now to start today's story and join us on this unforgettable journey. It all began in the quiet neighborhoods of Lincoln Park, a place where life usually moved at an unhurried pace. The streets, lined with neatly trimmed hedges and brownstone houses, seemed far removed from the chaos and injustice brewing beneath the surface. Yet, that calm exterior concealed a rising tension, a fear that gripped the hearts of its residents. Jake and Ryan Carter had returned to their hometown after years of serving in the military, hoping to reconnect with their roots and rediscover a semblance of peace. But Lincoln Park was no longer the safe haven it once was. Reports of targeted attacks on black residents had become disturbingly common. Whispers of a gang that prowled the streets with hatred in their hearts and violence in their hands. The brothers could feel the unease in the air, a heaviness that lingered even in the sunlight. Jake, the elder twin by 6 minutes, carried himself with a quiet confidence. His sharp gaze missed nothing, and his words, though few, always carried weight. Ryan, on the other hand, was quick-witted and fiercely protective, often masking his own fears with humor. They were nearly identical in appearance, their strong frames and resolute eyes a testament to years of shared battles. But their personalities complemented each other in perfect harmony. One cool evening, as the brothers walked down a cracked pavement street, the quiet was broken by faint murmurs. Jake, ever observant, slowed his pace, his sharp eyes scanning the shadows. "You hear that?" he asked, his voice low and measured. Ryan nodded, gripping the gym bag slung over his shoulder. "Yeah," he replied, his voice tinged with tension. "We've got company." From the mouth of an alley ahead, a group of men emerged like specters from a nightmare. Their bald heads gleamed under the dim streetlights, and tattoos coiled around their muscled arms like sinister warnings. At the center of the group stood a towering man with a twisted grin, the kind of smile that promised trouble. He took a step forward, his voice dripping with venom. "Well, look what we've got here," he sneered. "Two for the price of one." Jake and Ryan exchanged a glance, a silent conversation that spoke of years of training and unspoken understanding. Neither brother flinched as the gang spread out, blocking their path. To the gang, the twins looked like easy prey, two men who could be overpowered by sheer numbers. What they couldn't see was the storm of discipline and precision brewing beneath the brothers' calm exteriors. The gang leader's voice cut through the air like a knife. "Here's the deal. One of you stays, and the other walks away. Easy, right?" Ryan tilted his head, a faint smirk curling his lips. "How about you pick?" he retorted, his tone mocking. "I promise it'll be the worst mistake you've ever made." The leader's grin faded, replaced by a scowl. "Funny guy. Huh. You won't be laughing when we're done with you." Jake took a step forward, his voice steady as steel. "You think you're in charge here? You've got numbers. Sure. But you don't have what we have." The gang chuckled darkly, their bravado masking a growing unease. Jake and Ryan had seen that look before, the hesitation of men who realized too late that they'd underestimated their opponents. The brothers' sharp eyes and synchronized movements betrayed a readiness that couldn't be faked. As the tension crackled like a live wire, Jake muttered under his breath, "Guess we're not making it home on time." Ryan's grin widened. "Wouldn't want it any other way." The first man lunged forward, fists swinging wildly, but Jake sidestepped with practiced ease, landing a sharp elbow to the attacker's temple. The man crumpled to the ground, groaning. Another rushed Ryan, aiming a heavy punch at his ribs. Ryan ducked low, driving his shoulder into the man's stomach and sending him sprawling onto the pavement. "Is this all you've got?" Ryan taunted, straightening up as the remaining gang members hesitated. The fight that followed was brutal. A flurry of fists, grunts, and the dull thud of bodies hitting the ground. Jake and Ryan moved as one, their years of training evident in every precise strike and fluid dodge. They didn't speak, their unspoken bond guiding them through the chaos. By the end of it, the street was littered with the groaning forms of the gang, their confidence shattered. Jake turned his sharp gaze to the leader, who staggered to his feet, clutching his side. "You might want to rethink your career choices," Jake said coldly. The leader spat on the ground, his face twisted with rage. "This isn't over," he snarled. "Not by a long shot." Ryan stepped forward, his fists still clenched. "You're right," he said, his tone icy. "It's over when we say it is." As the gang retreated into the shadows, the twins stood side by side, battered but unbroken. The fight wasn't just about defending themselves, it was about standing against the hatred that had taken root in their city. They knew this was only the beginning. But as they walked away, the faint glimmer of determination in their eyes spoke of a resilience that no gang could ever crush. The quiet streets of Lincoln Park had never felt more hostile. Jake and Ryan Carter were no strangers to danger. But this was different. The faces of the gang they'd left behind haunted them. Not because of fear, but because of what those faces represented: a deeply rooted hatred that had grown bold enough to terrorize an entire community. As they walked back to their modest apartment, Ryan broke the silence. That leader, he wasn't bluffing when he said it wasn't over. You saw the way they moved. They weren't just some rowdy group of idiots. This was planned. Jake nodded, his jaw tight. "It's bigger than them. And we need to find out how far it goes." The following day, the brothers sat at their kitchen table. A small stack of printed news articles spread before them. Reports of targeted attacks had been circulating for weeks, each more brutal than the last. Homes vandalized, families driven out, and businesses destroyed, all with the same chilling signature: a group of bald men with tattoos, preying on those they deemed undesirable. "They're trying to claim the city," Ryan muttered, tapping one of the articles. "Look at the neighborhoods they're hitting. They're all places where black families are just starting to settle in. This isn't random." Jake leaned back in his chair, his sharp eyes scanning the room as though searching for answers in the air. "It's about control," he said finally. "And someone's funding it." Ryan frowned. "You think there's money behind this?" "There has to be," Jake replied. "Organizing this many people, coordinating attacks, that doesn't happen without resources. Someone's pulling the strings." Their conversation was interrupted by the soft buzz of Jake's phone. He picked it up, his face hardening as he read the message. "It's Maria," he said, referring to their childhood friend who had become Detective Amanda Blake. "She says there's something we need to see." Within an hour, they were seated in Amanda's sparsely decorated office at the precinct. The detective looked more exhausted than they'd ever seen her, her sharp features shadowed by sleepless nights. A stack of files lay open on her desk, each one containing photographs and reports that painted a grim picture. "I'll cut to the chase," Amanda said, sliding a folder across the desk. "We've been tracking a gang that matches your description. But it's not just a gang, it's a network. They're taking orders from someone higher up." Jake opened the folder, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the contents. A list of names and locations, each one tied to acts of violence and intimidation, stared back at him. At the top of the page, a word was scrawled in red ink: bounties. "They're offering money," Amanda continued, her voice tinged with disgust. "Targets are chosen based on race, income, or location. The more someone stands out, the higher the payout. It's organized hate. Plain and simple." Ryan's hands curled into fists. "Who's behind it?" Amanda hesitated, her gaze flickering to the closed door before she lowered her voice. "We don't know for sure, But there's one name that keeps coming up: Henry Whitaker. Jake's expression darkened. He recognized the name. Whitaker was a prominent real estate mogul known for his aggressive tactics, buying up properties and pushing out long-time residents under the guise of urban renewal. The idea that he could be funding such a violent operation sent a chill down Jake's spine. "He's untouchable," Amanda said, almost as if reading Jake's mind. "At least, that's what he thinks. But if we can connect him to the bounties, we can bring him down." "And how do we do that?" Ryan asked, his tone sharp. "He's not just going to leave a paper trail lying around." Amanda leaned forward, her voice steady despite the gravity of her words. "Rico, the gang leader you encountered last night. If we can get to him, we can start unraveling this." Jake exchanged a glance with Ryan, a silent agreement passing between them. They knew what they had to do, and they knew it wouldn't be easy. "We'll find him," Jake said, rising to his feet. "And when we do, we'll make sure he talks." As they left Amanda's office, the weight of their mission settled heavily on their shoulders. The fight ahead wasn't just about taking down a gang, it was about protecting their community, their home, from a hatred that threatened to consume it. And they were ready to face it. Together. The night air was sharp and cold as Jake and Ryan Carter stood outside an aging warehouse on the outskirts of Chicago. The building loomed in the darkness, its weathered walls lit by a faint glow from the overhead streetlights. The information detective Amanda Blake had provided had led them here, a known meeting point for Derek, the gang leader they had clashed with in Lincoln Park. Jake's voice was low and steady. "We move in fast and quiet. The goal is Derek. If we take him down, we take the first piece off the board." Ryan nodded, adjusting the gloves on his hands. "And if he doesn't feel like talking?" Jake's expression hardened. "He'll talk." They approached the building's side entrance, their movements silent and precise. Years of military training had conditioned them to read their surroundings, and now every sound and shadow felt amplified. Jake tested the doorknob, finding it unlocked. He glanced at Ryan, who nodded in silent agreement. The door creaked as they pushed it open, revealing a dimly lit hallway. The faint hum of machinery and low murmurs echoed through the space. Jake signaled for Ryan to follow, their steps cautious but deliberate. They didn't know how many men were inside, but they were prepared for anything. As they crept closer to the main area, the voices grew louder. Peering around the corner, they saw Derek standing at the center of a loose circle of men. He was barking orders, his voice carrying a mix of frustration and authority. "This is it," Jake whispered. "We wait for an opening." Ryan's sharp eyes scanned the room, noting the positions of the men. Most were armed, their weapons casually slung over shoulders or resting on nearby crates. It wasn't the kind of group that would hesitate to use force. Derek's voice cut through the air. "Stick to the plan. The boss wants results. And we're not getting paid to sit around." His words sent a ripple of unease through the men around him. Jake leaned closer to Ryan. "He's scared. He knows the heat is on." Ryan smirked faintly. "Good. Let's turn it up." Just as Jake was about to suggest their next move, a clatter echoed from the far end of the warehouse. One of Derek's men had knocked over a stack of crates, drawing everyone's attention. It was the moment the twins needed. Jake moved first, slipping into the room with practiced silence. Ryan followed closely, their movements fluid as they closed the distance to Derek. But before they could reach him, one of the gang members turned, his eyes widening in alarm. "Hey!" he shouted, reaching for his weapon. Chaos erupted. Jake lunged forward, disarming the man with a swift motion and delivering a hard jab to his jaw. Ryan ducked under a swing from another attacker, countering with a sharp kick that sent the man sprawling. Derek's voice rose above the noise. "Take them down." The gang surged toward the twins, but Jake and Ryan were ready. They moved like a well-oiled machine, their strikes precise and devastating. Each blow was calculated, their years of training evident in the efficiency of their movements. But for every man they incapacitated, another seemed to take his place. Ryan blocked a crowbar swing aimed at his head, grabbing the weapon and using it to knock his attacker unconscious. "This is getting old," he shouted over the din. Jake dodged a punch, countering with an elbow to the ribs. "Just keep moving." As the fight wore on, the twins managed to isolate Derek, backing him into a corner. The gang leader's bravado faltered, his eyes darting between the brothers. He reached for a pipe, swinging it wildly, but Jake caught his wrist, twisting it sharply until the pipe clattered to the ground. "Enough," Jake growled, pinning Derek against the wall. "You're done." Ryan stepped closer, his fists clenched. "We know about the bounties. Start talking, or this gets worse for you." Derek's lips curled into a sneer, but the fear in his eyes betrayed him. "You think I'm the one running this? You're wasting your time." Jake tightened his grip. "Then tell us who is." Derek hesitated, his gaze flickering with doubt before he finally spoke. "Henry Whitaker. He's the one calling the shots." The name hung in the air like a curse, confirming what Jake and Ryan had feared. But there was no time to dwell on it. Sirens wailed in the distance, drawing closer with every second. Amanda's team was on its way, but the brothers knew they needed to act fast. Jake leaned in, his voice low and cold. "If you're lying, we'll find out, and we'll be back." As the police arrived to secure the scene, Jake and Ryan stepped outside, their breaths visible in the crisp night air. They had taken the first step, but the road ahead was far from over. The stakes had risen, and they were ready to meet the challenge head-on. The night felt heavier as Jake and Ryan Carter sat in their apartment, the weight of Derek's words still fresh in their minds. Henry Whitaker, a name they knew all too well. He wasn't just a powerful real estate mogul, he was a man whose ambition and ruthlessness had left a trail of destruction across Chicago. The idea that he was orchestrating a network of violence sent a chill through them both. Ryan paced the small living room, his hands clenched into fists. "I knew Whitaker was a scumbag. But this, bounties, gangs, it's not just about money anymore. He's playing God." Jake, seated at the kitchen table with a steaming mug of coffee, stared at the list Amanda had given them. The names, locations, and chilling details of the attacks were etched into his mind. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's about control," he said quietly. "He's not just buying properties, he's trying to reshape the city in his image. And he's willing to destroy anyone who stands in his way." Ryan stopped pacing, turning to face his brother. "Then we take him down, the way we always do." Jake shook his head. "This isn't a battlefield, Ryan. Whitaker's not some soldier we can outmaneuver. He's a billionaire with lawyers, politicians, and enough influence to make us disappear if we're not careful." Ryan's eyes narrowed. "So what? We just sit here and wait for Amanda to handle it?" "No," Jake replied, his voice firm. "But we need to be smart. If Whitaker's behind this, there's evidence somewhere. We find it. We bring it to Amanda. And we let the system do the rest." Ryan scoffed. But he didn't argue. He knew Jake was right. Charging into Whitaker's world without a plan would only get them killed, or worse. The next morning, the twins met Amanda in a secluded corner of a downtown diner. She looked exhausted, her eyes shadowed from long nights of chasing leads and reviewing evidence. Yet, there was a spark of determination in her gaze that reassured them. "I've been digging into Whitaker," Amanda said, sliding a folder across the table. "Financial records, property acquisitions, even campaign donations. He's been buying his way into every corner of this city. But there's no direct link to the bounties, at least. Not yet." Jake opened the folder, flipping through the documents. The paper trail was impressive but incomplete. "What about Derek?" he asked. "Has he said anything useful?" Amanda shook her head, frustration flickering across her face. "He's holding back. claims he's scared of Whittaker. That even in custody, Whittaker can get to him. Ryan leaned forward, his tone sharp. What does Whittaker have that's so terrifying? Power. Amanda replied simply. Derek's terrified of being a loose end. And honestly, I don't blame him. Whittaker's reach is long. And his connections are airtight. But there's one lead that might help us. She pulled out a grainy aerial photograph, showing a sprawling estate on the outskirts of the city. This is Whittaker's private retreat. According to Derek, it's where he holds his meetings and keeps his sensitive files. If there's proof of the bounties, it'll be there. Ryan smirked faintly. So we break in, grab the files, and bring him down. Amanda's expression darkened. You're not breaking in. This is police business. And if we're caught, everything we've built against Whittaker falls apart. Jake exchanged a glance with Ryan, a silent agreement passing between them. You don't have the manpower to handle this quietly, Jake said. But we do. Amanda's jaw tightened. But she didn't argue. She knew the brothers were right. Fine, she said reluctantly. But you'll need to be careful. This isn't a gang warehouse. Whittaker's retreat is guarded. And he's not the kind of man to leave anything to chance. Jake nodded. We've handled worse. Ryan's smirk widened. Piece of cake. As they left the diner, the brothers' resolve hardened. The path ahead was fraught with danger. But they had no intention of backing down. Whittaker's empire of fear and violence had to end. And they were ready to do whatever it took to make that happen. The night was still and moonless, casting the forest surrounding Whittaker's estate into an oppressive darkness. Jake and Ryan Carter moved silently through the trees, their breaths visible in the cold air. The glow of the distant mansion peeked through the dense foliage, its floodlights creating pools of harsh brightness against the shadows. Jake crouched behind a tree, peering through a pair of binoculars. 2 guards at the main gate, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Heavily armed. But they're not expecting anything. Ryan adjusted his gloves, his smirk barely visible in the low light. Doesn't mean we can stroll through the front door. Jake scanned the perimeter, his sharp eyes locking onto a smaller gate at the northern edge of the property. It was obscured by a line of hedges and trees, with only a single camera mounted above it. There, he said, pointing. Service entrance. Minimal security. That's our way in. The brothers crept toward the gate, their movements practiced and deliberate. Jake pulled a small device from his jacket pocket, a signal jammer designed to temporarily disable cameras. He aimed it at the lens, and a faint red light on the device blinked. We've got 2 minutes, he murmured, gesturing for Ryan to follow. Ryan knelt by the gate, pulling out his lockpicking tools. Still don't see why I always get the dirty work, he muttered with a faint grin. Jake glanced back, keeping watch. Because you're faster at it. Within seconds, the lock clicked open, and the gate swung silently on its hinges. The brothers slipped through, immediately flattening themselves against the side of the mansion. The service entrance led into a narrow hallway, dimly lit by recessed lighting. The faint hum of machinery filled the air, accompanied by the occasional muffled sound of distant footsteps. Jake motioned for Ryan to follow as they moved deeper into the mansion. Each step was calculated, their senses heightened as they scanned for potential threats. Reaching a staircase at the end of the hallway, Jake pointed upward. Derek said the files are in Whittaker's office. 2nd floor. Ryan nodded, his jaw tight. Let's move. The staircase creaked under their weight, but the sound was drowned out by the distant murmur of voices. They reached the 2nd floor without incident, stopping at a sleek wooden door at the end of the corridor. A brass plaque read, "Private Office." Ryan pressed his ear to the door, listening for movement. "Quiet," he whispered, stepping back. "Let's hope it stays that way." Jake crouched by the lock, working quickly to open it. The door clicked, and he pushed it open just enough to peer inside. The office was expansive, its walls lined with dark wood paneling and shelves of meticulously arranged books. At the center stood a massive desk, flanked by filing cabinets and a sleek computer. "Jackpot," Ryan muttered as they slipped inside. Shutting the door behind them, Jake moved to the computer, pulling a flash drive from his jacket. He plugged it in and began typing, his fingers flying over the keyboard. "Cover me," he said without looking up. Ryan positioned himself by the door, his sharp eyes scanning the corridor through the narrow crack. The silence stretched, each second feeling like an eternity. Finally, Jake straightened, slipping the flash drive back into his pocket. "Got it. Financial records. Communications, everything we need." Ryan glanced over his shoulder, his expression grim. "Then let's get out of here before someone notices." They retraced their steps, moving quickly but cautiously. The staircase was clear, and the service hallway remained quiet. But as they approached the gate, an alarm suddenly blared, shattering the silence. "Damn it," Jake hissed, looking up at the reactivated camera. The override didn't hold. Ryan gritted his teeth. "No time to fix it. Let's go." The brothers burst through the gate, sprinting toward the tree line. Shouts erupted behind them as guards poured out of the mansion, their flashlights slicing through the darkness. "Split up," Jake called, veering left. "We'll meet at the car." Ryan nodded, darting to the right. He weaved through the trees, his steps quick and deliberate as the sound of pursuit grew louder. A gunshot cracked through the air, and he ducked instinctively, adrenaline surging through his veins. Jake pushed himself harder, his breath coming in sharp bursts as he leaped over a fallen log. His mind was focused on one thing, the flash drive in his pocket. They had what they came for, but it would mean nothing if they didn't make it out alive. Reaching a small ravine, Jake spotted a fallen tree bridging the gap. He scrambled across, his balance precarious as he heard the guards pause on the other side. He crouched low, holding his breath as their flashlights swept the area. Ryan wasn't far behind, using the dense underbrush to mask his movements. He climbed into the branches of a tall tree, watching as the guards passed beneath him, their curses fading into the distance. Minutes later, the brothers regrouped at the edge of the forest. Their clothes were torn, their breaths ragged, but the relief in their eyes was undeniable. Jake patted his jacket, ensuring the flash drive was secure. "We've got what we need," he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through him. Ryan smirked faintly, brushing dirt from his jacket. "Let's hope it's enough." As the sound of sirens echoed faintly in the distance, the brothers slipped into the shadows, their resolve stronger than ever. Whitaker's empire had started to crack, and they intended to bring the whole thing down. The early morning light painted the city in muted tones of grey and gold as Jake and Ryan Carter parked their car a block from the police station. The weight of their mission bore down on them with every step they took toward the building. The flash drive tucked securely in Jake's jacket pocket. Inside, Detective Amanda Blake waited, pacing the station's dimly lit hallway. Her sharp eyes caught sight of them immediately. "Tell me you've got something," she said, her voice laced with urgency. Jake nodded, pulling the drive from his pocket and handing it to her. "It's all here: financial records, communications, maps of targeted neighborhoods. Whitaker's fingerprints are all over this." Amanda took the drive, her expression hardening as she slipped it into her coat. "If this holds up, it's enough to get warrants and start making arrests. Whitaker's been untouchable for too long. But this is a game changer." Ryan crossed his arms, his gaze steady. "You need to move fast. He'll know we were there, and he'll start covering his tracks." Amanda nodded, determination flickering in her eyes. "I've already got a team on standby. Once we verify the files, we're hitting his high-rise office. Whitaker's going to face justice." Jake stepped closer, his tone firm. "Don't underestimate him, Amanda. Whitaker's the kind of man who fights dirty. He'll have contingencies. And he won't go quietly. I know. Amanda replied. But we're ready. As Amanda disappeared into a back room to meet with her team, the brothers exchanged a glance. They had faith in Amanda's abilities. But they also knew the danger they were all walking into. Whitaker was powerful. And men like him didn't fall without a fight. By the time the police convoy assembled, the city had begun to stir. Commuters filled the streets, oblivious to the storm brewing above them. Jake and Ryan stood to the side, dressed in plain clothes. They had insisted on being there, and Amanda had reluctantly allowed it. Though her instructions were clear, they were observers. Nothing more. The convoy moved swiftly through the streets, the flashing blue and red lights reflecting off glass buildings as they neared Whitaker's high-rise. The towering structure loomed over the city, a symbol of the man's wealth and influence. Inside, Whitaker sat in his expansive office, the skyline stretching out behind him. The police entered the lobby with precision, securing the guards who surrendered without a fight. Amanda's voice rang out, authoritative and firm. This is the Chicago PD. We have a warrant for the arrest of Henry Whitaker. Anyone interfering will face charges. As her team moved toward the elevators, Jake and Ryan followed quietly, their presence drawing a warning glare from Amanda. Stay back, she hissed. This is our operation. The brothers nodded, but neither made any promises. Their focus remained on Whitaker, the man who had orchestrated so much violence and pain in the city they had once fought to protect. Upstairs, Whitaker watched the security feed, his jaw tightening as he saw the officers advancing. Delay them, he ordered his head of security, who nodded before speaking into his radio. Whitaker moved to his desk, retrieving a sleek laptop and locking it in a hidden compartment. When the police reached his floor, they were met with armed resistance. Guards emerged from side doors, weapons raised. Get down, Amanda shouted as the first shots rang out. Chaos erupted as officers returned fire, carefully advancing under cover. Jake and Ryan exchanged a glance. They couldn't stand by while lives were at risk. Without hesitation, they moved into the fray. Jake disarmed a guard with precision, delivering a swift elbow to his jaw. Ryan tackled another, pinning him to the ground before rendering him unconscious. Amanda shot them an exasperated look but didn't stop them. They were too effective to argue with. As the hallway cleared, the team regrouped outside Whitaker's office. Amanda signaled for them to breach, her heart pounding as they prepared for the final confrontation. The door burst open, revealing Whitaker standing by the windows, his back straight and his hands clasped behind him. He turned slowly, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "Detective Blake," he said, his tone calm and measured. "I was wondering when you'd arrive." Amanda stepped forward, her weapon trained on him. "Henry Whitaker, you're under arrest for conspiracy, racketeering, and incitement to violence. Put your hands where I can see them." Whitaker didn't move. His smirk widened as his gaze shifted to Jake and Ryan. "I should have known you two were involved. Always trying to play heroes." Ryan stepped forward, his fists clenched. "You're done, Whitaker. Your empire's crumbling." Whitaker's eyes narrowed, his calm demeanor slipping. "You think you've won? You've only scratched the surface." Before anyone could react, Whitaker lunged toward his desk, pulling open a hidden panel. He retrieved a sleek black pistol, aiming it wildly as chaos erupted once more. Chaos erupted as Whitaker raised his pistol, his hand trembling but his intent clear. Officers dove for cover, shouting commands that were lost in the deafening sound of gunfire. Whitaker's shot embedded itself in the wall near Amanda, sending plaster dust into the air. Jake tackled her to the ground, shielding her from another wild shot. "Stay down," Jake barked, his voice sharp with urgency. Ryan, already on his feet, moved with military precision. He darted toward the nearest piece of cover, a heavy wooden cabinet, and peeked out to assess the situation. "Whitaker, standing near the shattered remains of his desk, was visibly unhinged. His once calculated demeanor had crumbled, replaced by desperation. "You'll never take me alive," Whitaker shouted, his voice cracking. The weight of impending defeat was heavy in his words. Jake crouched behind a fallen chair, his eyes meeting Ryan's for a brief moment. The silent communication between them spoke volumes. They had faced danger together countless times, and they knew what needed to be done. Jake nodded subtly, signaling Ryan to move. Ryan lunged forward, drawing Whitaker's attention with a calculated feint. "What's the plan, Henry?" he called out, his tone mocking. "Shoot your way out of this. Or maybe jump out the window and see if your money can catch you." Whitaker snarled, his focus shifting entirely to Ryan. He fired another shot, missing by inches as Ryan ducked behind a steel filing cabinet. The distraction gave Jake the opening he needed. Moving with practiced stealth, he crept along the side of the room, staying low to avoid Whitaker's line of sight. Meanwhile, Amanda regained her composure, signaling to her team to flank Whitaker. The officers moved cautiously, their weapons trained on the cornered man. The tension in the room was palpable, every sound magnified by the silence that followed each gunshot. "You think you're heroes?" Whitaker shouted, his voice dripping with disdain. "You're nothing. This city doesn't want your help, it belongs to me." Jake finally reached the side of the desk, his breathing steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. He could see Whitaker's unsteady grip on the pistol, his confidence unraveling with every second that passed. "Drop it, Whitaker," Jake said, his voice low and commanding. "You're out of options." Whitaker's head snapped toward Jake, his eyes wild. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't about options. This is about power." Before Whitaker could aim, Jake surged forward, grabbing his wrist and twisting it sharply. The gun clattered to the floor, skidding across the room. Whitaker cried out in pain, but he didn't stop fighting. He swung wildly at Jake, his movements frantic and fueled by desperation. Ryan joined the fray, tackling Whitaker to the ground. Together, the brothers pinned him, their combined strength overwhelming his flailing attempts to break free. "It's over," Ryan growled, his voice firm. "Stop fighting." Whitaker slumped beneath them, his resistance fading as the reality of his defeat set in. The room fell silent, save for the labored breathing of everyone present. Amanda approached cautiously, her weapon still drawn. "Henry Whitaker," she said, her tone steady. "You're under arrest. You have the right to remain silent." Jake and Ryan released Whitaker as Amanda's team moved in to secure him. He glared at the brothers, his face pale and twisted with anger. "You think this changes anything?" he spat. "People like me don't disappear." Jake leaned in close, his voice cold. "No, but they fall. And you just did." Whitaker was hauled to his feet and led out of the office, his threats fading into the hallway. The brothers exchanged a glance, exhaustion written across their faces. The fight was over, but the weight of what they had uncovered lingered heavily. Amanda holstered her weapon, turning to Jake and Ryan. "That was reckless," she said, her voice softening despite the reprimand. "But effective." Ryan smirked faintly. "We're not great at sitting on the sidelines." Amanda shook her head, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Clearly. Let's hope this is enough to put him away for good." The three of them stood in the wrecked office, the distant sounds of the city filtering in through the shattered windows. For the first time in weeks, the scales of power had shifted, and hope felt tangible. The day unfolded slowly after the chaos of the arrest. The golden light of morning bathed the city. But for Jake and Ryan Carter, it felt like the first moment of calm in weeks. They sat on the hood of their car, parked at a small hill overlooking the city. The sprawling skyline stretched out before them, its towering buildings no longer feeling quite so imposing. Jake rubbed his temples, exhaustion etched into his features. "You ever think about what we're actually doing? Taking on men like Whittaker, it feels like we're trying to drain the ocean with a spoon. Ryan chuckled softly, leaning back and letting the cool air brush over his face. Yeah. But it's not just about the ocean, is it? It's about the drops. Every person we help, every system we expose, it's worth it. Jake glanced at his brother, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. You always manage to spin things the right way. Don't know how you do it. Years of practice. Ryan replied, smirking. And maybe a little stubbornness. Their moment of quiet reflection was interrupted by the buzz of Jake's phone. He checked the screen and sighed. Amanda. She probably wants an update. He answered, holding the phone to his ear. Yeah. On the other end, Detective Amanda Blake's voice was firm but carried an undertone of relief. We've processed everything. The files are solid: financial records, communications, and even surveillance footage tying Whittaker to the gang leaders. His lawyer's going to fight it. But we've got more than enough to hold him. That's good news, Jake said, his tone measured. What's next? We've got warrants ready to go for his remaining properties and associates. This is just the beginning, Jake. But you and Ryan should take a breather. You've earned it. Jake hung up, sliding the phone back into his pocket. Looks like Whittaker's not going anywhere for a while. They've got enough to keep him locked up. Ryan nodded. But his expression didn't brighten. You think it's really over? For him? Maybe, Jake replied. But Amanda's right, it's just the beginning. There's always someone else in the shadows. Ryan let out a long breath, his gaze fixed on the city. I hate that you're right. People like Whittaker don't rise to power alone. There are others. Pulling strings. Funding operations. Making deals. That's why we keep going, Jake said simply. We've seen what happens when no one stands up to them. Ryan smirked, shaking his head. You always did have a hero complex. And you always liked picking fights. Jake shot back, his grin growing. Guess that makes us a good team. The brothers fell into a comfortable silence, their bond strengthened by the trials they had endured. The weight of their journey lingered, but so did the satisfaction of knowing they had made a difference. Across town, Detective Blake stood in her office, staring out at the bustling streets below. The evidence against Whittaker was being reviewed, the pieces of his empire slowly unraveling under the weight of their investigation. But even as she felt a sense of accomplishment, Amanda couldn't shake the nagging thought that this fight wasn't over. Her phone buzzed with a new message, a report on Whittaker's remaining assets. It was a long list, each item a potential lead. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. There was still so much to do. But for now, they had a victory. And victories, no matter how small, were worth savoring. Back on the hill, Jake and Ryan watched as the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting the city in warm hues of orange and gold. Ryan stretched, standing up and grabbing his jacket. So, what's next? Jake shrugged, standing to join him. We wait. Amanda's team will do their part. And if they need us, we'll be ready. And if they don't? Ryan asked, raising an eyebrow. Jake smiled faintly, clapping his brother on the shoulder. Then we find the next fight. Together. They climbed into their car and drove off, leaving the city lights behind. The road stretched ahead, full of unknowns. But for the Carter brothers, one thing was certain: wherever the fight for justice took them, they'd face it side by side. As the Carter brothers drove away, the city behind them glowed in the warm hues of dusk, a symbol of the justice they had fought for and the countless lives they had protected. Though the battle against Henry Whittaker was over, they both knew that their fight for justice was far from complete. Each victory was a step forward, a reminder that change begins with those willing to take a stand. For Jake and Ryan, the road ahead was uncertain, but their bond and shared purpose would carry them through. Together, they were ready to face whatever challenges came next, armed with resilience, courage, and the determination to make a difference. Thank you for watching this story. Don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories for more inspiring tales of resilience, courage, and the power of the human spirit. See you in the next video.